All right, shalom, shalom, shalom. It is Yom Shishi evening. You are live and direct with your Akazaki Yahoo. I'm giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah Bahashem, Yahushua Hamashiach, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who were scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, wa, baruchim. That is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day when the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation under the Most High Power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Yes, indeed. I'm joined this evening by my most esteemed Kenaniah. Shalom, my king.
Hey, shalom, shalom, my king. Shalom, shalom, Yasharal. Call halal Yahweh. Bahashem, Hamashiach. Wa Malak Yahweh Shah. Barakatham.
Hallelujah. All praises to Yahweh in the name of his beloved son, Yahweh Shah, the Messiah. Bless you. The Messiah and King, bless you. Hallelujah. We are back again, once again, for another video review. We have a magnificent video for you this evening. And so buckle your seatbelts and get ready to be amazed. The question is Hellenization. Are you Hellenized? How do you know? How would you figure it out? Let's get to it. Here we go. This first video brought to us by Truth Unedited. All three of these coming from Truth Unedited, part of his series. He wants you to start from video 1. Well, you can click on his page and go to video 1. We starting with video 13, Testing Christianity, Alexander the Greek, and the quest to make the world Greeks. So let's get some understanding. Here we go.
Okay, so you should be coming from part 12 of the series. These videos are a part of a topical series and should be watched from the beginning in order if you're going to understand what is being presented. If you have not watched from part 1, please stop this video and start back from video 1.
Link in the description box.
So
right below.
in the last part, part 12, we were introduced to the Greek philosophers who were the actual prophets to the Greeks. The Hebrews, they had Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel, men like that. The Greeks, they had Socrates, philosophies, and hypotheses. Bars. That's from our New Yorkers. Anyways, the Greeks, they had these philosophers who were being used by Satan to create the mindset that would prepare the Roman world for the acceptance of the new religion Satan would create. From the beginning of this series, I've explained that Christianity is a religion of tares that Satan planted. Messiah himself gave this prophecy. The tares were planted when Satan used these pagans and began to correlate the foundation that he laid with the prophets, like Socrates and Plato, and he began to correlate their philosophy in with the faith that the Hebrews presented. We've gone over much of this history extensively. Now, the thing is that there is a missing link to understanding this, and it comes from a lack of understanding how the culture of the Greeks was spread. Many people do not understand Hellenization, and in order that we understand how these tares were spread, we must understand the history of how the culture of the Greeks made it into the Roman world. We also need to speak about the set-apart culture of Yasharel, specifically the Yahudim who were in Judea, who met the Messiah. People assume that because the culture of the Greeks was the accepted way of the majority, that the Hebrews were just supposed to accept it as well. But this comes from a false way of understanding the Hebrews and the word itself, because they were not a part of the world, and they were the only ones taught to be set apart. This is something that someone said to me in correspondence about the Yahudim accepting Greek culture. This is what he said. The Greek language was the lingua franca of that day. The overwhelming majority of people under the Roman Empire, including Jews, spoke Greek. This is not even much of a dispute. There is a reason there is no Hebrew or Aramaic Bible prior to the early 4th century. You seem to equate speaking Greek with being Greek. Your understanding is lacking and flawed. That is the equivalent to believing that Spanish-speaking people are Spanish or English-speaking people are English. And for the most part, what he's saying is correct, including with Jews speaking Greek, because there were. But while he says my understanding is flawed, there are obvious pieces to the puzzle that he does not see. And I get it, this is how people feel. But when I show them quotes from historians like Josephus that totally prove that their way of thinking is incorrect, because Josephus himself, he said that the Yahudim did not have a culture of learning the other languages of the world. It was something that they frowned upon. And when I show them these things and prove that their way of thinking is incorrect, they ignore it and move on to something else. There is a lack of understanding of history, and more importantly, a lack of understanding of the set-apart culture of Yasharel, and why they were the only people in this world that were commanded by our Father to reject this culture of the Greeks that was being spread. And they rejected the ones who did assimilate. Today, in our modern world, people just want to make assumptions that because Greek was overly accepted, that it just makes sense that the Yahudim did this. And when you feel this way, it shows that you're missing an important understanding about our Father and the way that he led his people. In another correspondence, someone said to me, God has gone by different names at different times. The supreme name we have been given for the time is Jesus, which is the English rendering of the original Isis from the Greek. Why do you think Hebrew is some special language? Again, this is how people feel, and leaving out dealing with the other false notion about our Father having different names, which is another doctrine that leads to Satan, because it's Satan that has many names. The reason why the Hebrew language is special is because this is the language of the people that he chose and is in covenant with. It's the only people he dwelled amongst and that he led personally. It's the only language he wrote the commandments in. It's the only language his people spoke. They were a set-apart people called to not assimilate and learn the ways of the other nations. Hebrew is the language of creation, as the book of Jubilees tells us. I'll read it to you. And Yahweh Elohim said, "Open his mouth and his ears, that he may hear and speak with his mouth, with the language which has been revealed. For it had ceased from the mouths of all the children of men from the day of the overthrow of Babel. And I opened his mouth and his ears and his lips, and I began to speak with him in Hebrew, in the tongue of creation. And he took the Sepharim of his fathers, and these were written in Hebrew, and he transcribed them, and he began from henceforth to study them. And I made known to him that which he could not understand, and he studied them during the 6 rainy months. And it came to pass in the 7th year of the 6th week that he spoke to his father and informed him that he would leave Haran to go into the land of Canaan to see it and return to him." That's Jubilees chapter 12, verses 25 through 28. And this is talking about Abraham right here. You see, Hebrew is the language of creation, and scriptures like these are the reason why these books were decided to not be put into our Bibles, because people would know this. Anyways, the point is that the Yahudim did not assimilate with the Greeks. Well, I'm speaking about the ones in Judea. But if you do not know this history, you will not understand this. So it must be brought out. So now that we know about the foundation of the Greeks from the Greek philosophers, we need to understand how this culture was spread later. And the understanding of this comes through understanding Hellenization. So what is Hellenization? This is an important word and concept that must not be forgotten because it is the main strategy of the enemy. Hellenization is the adoption of Greek culture, religion, language, and identity by non-Greeks. Again, this understanding should not be glossed over. Let me clarify Hellenization. In referencing about the Hellenistic age, I will read from the Encyclopedia Britannica. The Hellenistic age in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East, the period between the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC and the conquest of Egypt by Rome in 30 BC. For some purposes, the period is extended for a further 3.5 centuries to the move by Constantine the Great of his capital to Constantinople, Byzantium, in 330 CE. From the breakup of Alexander's empire, there arose numerous realms, including the Macedonian, the Seleucid, and the Ptolemaic, that served as the framework for the spread of Greek Hellenic culture, the mixture of Greek with other populations, and the fusion of Greek and Eastern elements. Okay, that's a lot of words, but in summary, this is explaining that the time period of this promotion of Greek culture, language, and lifestyle, which is called the Hellenistic age, was from 323 BC all the way to 330 AD, basically spanning almost 600 years. And this was merging Greek culture in with the other populations of the world. So this brings us back to Greece. In the second half of the 4th century, the Macedonians, these were Greeks, They were a diverse group of people living in northern Greece. Their ruler, King Philip II, marched through the Greek peninsula. If you remember in part 12, Athens and Sparta were divided because of the Peloponnesian War, but they were now united, even if it was against their will. In 336 BC, when Greek unity was completed, King Philip was murdered. Then his 20-year-old son, Alexander, even though it was him that was under suspicion of being the engineer of his father's death, he replaced him. This son is who we know as Alexander the Great. Now, many of the Greek city-states showed little enthusiasm for Alexander's rule. The animosity between the Macedonians and the Greeks was so intense that some Greeks refused to participate in Alexander's army of conquest. Let's talk about Alexander. So Alexander, he was a student of Aristotle and was said to display remarkable military skills. His Macedonian Greek army conquered Asia Minor, Egypt, Syria, Babylon, and Persia. Alexander began to adopt Persian ways, including a demand that he was to be worshipped as divine, something many of his soldiers found repulsive. In 323 BC, Alexander came down with a fever, and within a short time, he died. He was 33 years old. His death threw the conquered territories into confusion. You see, Alexander had plundered the Persian Empire, Asia Minor, and Egypt, but other than placing Macedonians in charge of existing governments, he did little to bring any central organization to the conquered territories. He just left them. Alexander left his mark on every area he conquered, though. Throughout his empire, him and his successors, they constructed new cities or modified existing ones to conform to a Greek model. In these cities, Greek architecture, religion, athletics, and culture were introduced to the population. A number of Greek cities sprang up along the Mediterranean coast of Judea and in Samaria. Alexandria on the Egyptian coast would eventually become the home of the ancient world's greatest library until it was burned down by the Romans. Okay, understand this about Alexander. Alexander, he was a great conqueror, not just because he took control of vast amounts of land, but it was his method of control of these lands that was special. For instance, Egypt welcomed him as a liberator because they hated Persian rule. They placed Alexander on the throne of the pharaohs, giving him the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, and named him the incarnation of Ra and Osiris. This is when he set in motion the plans for the second largest city in Egypt named after him, Alexandria. Alexander's conquest introduced Greek culture into the Eastern Mediterranean world. His rule introduced Hellenism. Again, Hellenism is the adoption of Greek culture, religion, language, and identity by non-Greeks. It's making non-Greeks Greeks. And this is why Alexander's rule was so unparalleled. So because though he conquered these civilizations, he left the country to the people, what he did mostly was import his Greek culture. Cities such as Alexandria and Egypt became influential centers of Greek learning. This could be compared to, let's say, America taking over a country, let's say Iraq, and they left the government to themselves and let the Iraqis control the government. But they started bringing in their shopping malls, their movies, their churches, their way of life. Everything about the American way of life, they brought it to Iraq. Now, Iraq is still running the same, but all of a sudden they start living like Americans. This is how Hellenism works. It's the strategy of just bringing in the culture and making people Greeks. Let's keep going. So like I said, Alexander died 323 BC. His empire was divided among several of his generals. One of these, named Seleucus, took control of much of the old Persian Empire, a territory we know as Asia Minor, modern Turkey, and Syria. Another named Ptolemy, he governed Egypt. It's said that he hijacked Alexander's corpse and used it as proof of his succession and seized Egypt. These two generals established the Seleucid and Ptolemaic dynasties. This was not a peaceful period for them, but the spread of Greek culture persisted in society since this period and never stopped. The Macedonian rulers promoted Greek language and customs in the areas under their control, exposing literate people from diverse cultures to the philosophies of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. One ideal that they did not spread, since it would undermine their power, was Athenian democracy. That did not come through in those lands. For nearly 300 years, the lands conquered by Alexander would be embroiled in warfare between the competing Macedonian Greek dynasties of the Seleucid and Ptolemaic dynasties. And from this later came the takeover by the Romans. Okay, you should know the Romans culture is not Roman culture. It is a continuance of Greek culture, just with the Romans in control of it. And as history continued to go forth throughout the world, our culture today is still built upon the same Greek influence that the Romans took over. But let's keep going talking about the Greeks. Because the Grecian Empire was split, a new power was rising over the Mediterranean. Eventually, the Romans came sweeping over the Greeks in a series of 2nd century BC wars. The Romans, they plundered every piece of Greek art and sculpture that they could find. Rome basically conquered the Greeks, but took their culture as their own, and they continued with the process of Hellenization. So even though it was not their culture, they continued to spread the Greek culture. Roman architecture, art, literature, and religion, all of it amongst the Romans showed influence by the Greeks. It was all from the Greeks, but under the banner of the Romans. The Romans' upper-class families imported Greek tutors to teach their children. Some Romans sent their young men to Athens to further their education in philosophy, arts, and science. The Romans took over the culture of the Greeks. You must understand that. Now, I really want you to understand this. And to do this, we need to go back. Go back to the book of Genesis. In the beginning, what did Satan try to do to rebel against our Father? Let's read it. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But Yahuwah came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And Yahuwah has said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So Yahuwah scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. And that's found in Genesis chapter 11, verses 4 through 8. You see, it was the goal of Satan to rebel against Yahuwah through the people coming together under one tongue to collectively work in rebellion. That was Satan's goal. Now, after Yah confounded their language and dealt with them, do you believe that Satan just abandoned that goal and said, "I'm never going to do that again"? Absolutely not. We see it today with English. It's the culture being used in the same way it was used in Babylon. English today could be considered the language of the world. It's the most well-known language amongst the world population. Anyways, the point I'm making is that it's Satan's goal to spread his ways and unite men under it to rebel against our Father. And so after he established himself centuries earlier with his prophets, the Greek philosophers, after the religion was set, he then set in motion the events that would spread his culture, which is why a wicked empire like the Romans didn't feel the need to change the culture of the Greeks. They just said that they would do a better job of spreading it. And so they just took control of it and spread it further. And the major understanding that is not known is that this process of Hellenization has never stopped. And one main way of spreading it is through the religion of Christianity. You see, understand this. Christians are Hellenized disciples spreading the culture of the Greeks in the guise of their religion. They argue all day about the culture of the Greeks. They say Jesus is our Messiah's name, even though they know that that's not true. They protect the language and the culture of the Greeks at all costs, and they don't want to hear about the set apart, holy way our Father led his chosen people. It's all because of Hellenization. And if you're looking at the world through the eyes of the Greeks, it's because you have been Hellenized and indoctrinated on the side of the enemy. The basis for the Greek association with the people of Yasharel is the claim that the New Testament was written in Greek, which we know is not true because the early church fathers themselves tells us that the first book of the gospel, the book of Matthew, it was written in Hebrew. The actual truth is that it's not that the New Testament was written in Greek, but that there are no more original manuscripts, and the only manuscripts we have are written in Greek. That's a very different thing. But because of this claim, people have chosen to accept Hellenization instead of rejecting it. What you have seen in my videos with using our Father and Messiah's true name and rejecting many traditions of the Greek culture is me rejecting Hellenization. And so That is the main difference that you will find with this ministry, and why you say, why do you use these names and why do you always speak about the Hebrews? Is because I reject Hellenization. And the major difference that you see with everyone else is that they don't. They accept Hellenization and they spread Hellenization, because Christianity is a religion of the Hellenized Greeks, and Christians are just disciples of Hellenization. You see, Hellenization, it has never stopped, as I said earlier. To this day in America, it is a major part of American society. Like, of course, look at the architecture of the United States. Why do you think it's built like that? Many public buildings in the United States, including the United States Capitol, incorporate elements of classical Greek architecture, such as columns and pediments. People like to say, oh, it's built like the Romans. No, it's actually built like the Greeks. Why do you think that they use that architecture? It is all an embrace of the mystery religions and satanic goals that are hidden within their secret societies. Satan is all in the midst of this all. Satan is in the midst of this world, and it should be understood that Greek culture is the culture of Satan. And as the world embraces it and tries to attach to our Father through the Greeks, they are not recognizing that they are embracing satanic culture. I just said a lot, so I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to repeat it slow. Satan is in the midst of this world, and it should be understood that Greek culture is the culture of Satan. And as the world embraces it and tries to attach to our Father through the way of the Greeks, they are not embracing our Father, but they are embracing satanic culture that leads to Satan. Many people will say, well, God created all languages when he confused them at Babel. And yes, he did this, yes. But that does not mean that they were created in a way to serve him. That's why it's important to read your whole Bible, because if you read your whole Bible from the beginning, you will know that he dealt with no other nation. These people, they never desired to serve Yah. Yahweh, he just made it more difficult for them to rebel against him. That's all. Satan has worked continuously through the centuries, slowly, to bring the world back to the goal of Babel. And he's used these empires like the Greeks, the Romans, the English, all to do so. Look at the influence of Hellenism in our world today. Our sporting contests are all from Greek culture. Sports like basketball and football, though they may not be Greek games, the sports competitions are all a part of Greek culture. The origin of soccer itself, the football, what they call it around the world, its origins can be traced to ancient Greece. The Greeks believed that competition, or agon, was a fundamental part of life and was expressed in many aspects of Greek culture, including sports, music, drama, politics, and law. And I'm not saying that you're evil for playing sports or that you're a Greek for playing sports. I'm just want you to know where these cultures come from. If you understand how these cultures have been passed down, you can understand more about the world that you live in. The Greek theater was a major part of Greek life. Our practice of medicine is influenced by the Greeks. I mean, just look at our education system. The concept of a formal graduation ceremony with its emphasis on academic achievement, a symbolic rite of passage, and the presentation of a diploma draw a significant influence from the ancient Greece, where education was highly valued and marked by public recognition of a student's completion of studies. The word diploma comes from the Greek. It means double-folded paper. Our culture comes from the Greeks. My point is that there's a great deal of culture that comes from the Greeks that is still in our modern world today. We are Hellenized. The whole government system of democracy comes from the Greeks, and this government is spread all over the world.
Elections plus a focused foreign policy effort that helps build the institutions of democracy is what is going to be necessary to ultimately defeat the hateful ideology of those who would do our country harm.
So let us remember that this is a season of progress. For the first time in decades, Tunisians, Egyptians, and Libyans voted for new leaders in elections that were credible, competitive, and fair. This democratic spirit has not been restricted to the Arab world. Over the past year, we've seen peaceful transitions of power in Malawi and Senegal, and a new president in Somalia. In Burma, a president has freed political prisoners and opened a closed society. A courageous dissident has been elected to parliament, and people look forward to further reform. Around the globe, people are making their voices heard, insisting on their innate dignity, and the right to determine their future. And yet the turmoil of recent weeks reminds us that the path to democracy does not end with the casting of a ballot.
What I'm trying to say is that the Greeks did not mean to run the world by governing over it. They meant to run the world by spreading its culture and making the nations live through Greek culture. And by making it live through Greek culture, being that the foundation of the Greek culture was led through the mystery religions, it all leads back to Satan. And as you can see, this influence, it has never gone away. I'm just listing out things that are very easy to see. And so if you're able to understand how deep this goal of Hellenization is, and then understand that Christianity is also a part of that influence, you can understand the problem. And this is why Christianity is the major religion of the world, because it spreads Hellenization. I really want you to think about it. It's why we want to adapt to a Greek savior instead of a Hebrew one. Our Messiah was never named Isis. He was Hebrew. He was Hebrew. There was nothing Greek about him. It's all a part of the same influence. And listen, though all of this is important, the major influence that's overlooked, and that should not be, is the influence on our minds and the influence of how we think. And we can't understand that until we understand the spread of Greek philosophy. And if you understand this influence from the beginning, it will help you understand the mindset of the Roman pagan converts when they took control over the faith that came from the Hebrews. The Hebrews, they were to apply what was told to them. The Greeks used reason and logic, saying, well, if it says this, then it means this. And if that means that, then this must mean this. And this is Greek reasoning. It's logic. It is the culture of the Greeks. And this is what goes on with most major false doctrines in Christianity. It's because of reasoning. It's not because the doctrine says this. It's because people hear this and then they make another reasoning and logic, and it just goes in this whole big logic puzzle that leads to a false doctrine. And if you don't understand that this comes from the Greek mindset of logic and reasoning, and not from the Hebrew mindset that you read about in the scriptures from the beginning, this is where confusion comes from. But this may be hard to understand if you don't understand the actual culture of the Hebrews. So understand this. There was only one nation of people that truly resisted Hellenization, and that was the Yahudim in Judea. So as I said, Ptolemy took over Egypt, and shortly after that, in 320 BC, he went to Judea to claim it as well. It's said that he anticipated some difficulty, but to his surprise, the Yahudim did not make the slightest effort to defend themselves. Why? Because they went on the Sabbath. You see, to the Greeks, the idea of the Sabbath was unknown, and they didn't understand it. To them, it seemed ridiculous for people to not defend themselves at all times. They looked at the Yahudim as foolish people. According to Josephus, Ptolemy showed kindness to the Yahudim. According to the testimony of Hecataeus of Abdera, whom Josephus cites in his work against Appian, because of Ptolemy's kindness, many Yahudim felt impelled to move to Egypt. And it's said that in 311 BC, the high priest Hezekiah went with Ptolemy to Egypt. You see, there were many Yahudim who were in search of new opportunities to make a living, and they chose to leave their homeland. So slowly, Yahudim settlements grew up along the coast of the Mediterranean on the islands of Greece, and even along the shores of the Black Sea. And this is when you begin to see the diaspora of the Yahudim being spread. Because these Yahudim left their homeland and they were being separated from their people in a new land, these Yahudim began to adapt to Hellenization. They learned Greek language and adopted some Greek customs and ideas. One great example of this is what happened in Alexandria in Egypt. Dealing with Alexandria, Alexander, he planned, and his successor Ptolemy, he continued to build Alexandria as a commercial port. In a very short time, this port of Alexandria became one of the most active commercial centers of the world. And you did not need to force anyone to settle there. People came on their own. This is where all the business was. The Yahudim, they spread there. It became an important part of the community of Alexandria. Okay, got that. Now listen, to be a citizen in a Greek city, it involved, to some extent, the matter of religion. You see, each city had its protecting patron, god or goddess. Patriotic festivals and even games of sport, of which Greeks were very fond of, they were bound up with sacrifices to those pagan gods. So obviously, the Yahudim knew they could not take part in any of these activities, and they excluded themselves from full citizenship. But they could not be called foreigners because they were a great help and great influence in making Alexandria what it was under Ptolemy. They had great influence there. The first Ptolemies understood all of that, and they permitted these Yahudim to organize a separate community within Alexandria. And this is what the Yahudim did all over the world as you see them spread out. They had Yahudim quarters. They had their own courts of law and conducted themselves under their Torah. They built their own communities amongst their people because of the need of complying with their dietary laws and the desire to be near their synagogues. And this is how the synagogues began to be spread around Asia Minor and Greece, which is where Paul, Peter, the apostles, how they began to spread the good news. It's all part of the same history. Now get this. This was all in the beginning of the spread of Hellenization. But as the role of Greece spread in the world and people became more accepting of Greek culture, in Alexandria, the time came where there was more Greek learning and philosophical thinking than in Greece itself. And the Yahudim began to adapt and become influenced by the Greeks. They began to learn the Greek language, began to admire the Greek culture, but they insisted on remaining Yahudim, meaning living by their Torah. You see, the first generation did not understand much Greek. Perhaps the next generation understood both Hebrew and Greek. The third generation understood very little Hebrew. Their native tongue was now Greek. They read Greek books and accepted Greek ideas. They could not read Hebrew, and this was a problem for many that still did not want to completely walk away from their faith. So they encouraged their children to study the Hebrew language so that they might be able to become acquainted with the ideas of the Yahudim in their original way. So what they did is they translated the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, in Greek, and it's called the Pentateuch, simply meaning 5 books, so that they did not truly forget where they came from. Now, the history is much deeper than that. I'm just giving a brief overview of it. And because 70 learned scribes were a part of this translation, the Pentateuch was called the Septuagint, which means the 70. And so these assimilated Yahudim began to merge with the Greeks, and this is where the confusion and the trouble began. There's a lot more to this history, but it does not matter, honestly. Now, what happened in Alexandria can provide understanding about what happened all over this new Greek world. In the area they call Palestine, Greek influence, it was spreading as well. On every side of Judea, old cities that used to call themselves Ammonite or Syrian or Philistine assumed new Greek names and practiced the Greek way of life. Everything began to adopt to the way of the Greeks. Hellenization was ruling. Even their old gods were given Greek names. The Yahudim were surrounded by a changing world that was all becoming Greeks. Those who took part in this new Greek wave were taking part in a great movement of prosperity as trade began to open markets. So if you took part in this Greek culture and this Greek way of life, you began to prosper because you were trading with everybody else. It was the way of life. The Yahudim in Judea, they did trade, but they could not keep up with that of their neighbors who actually truly adjusted and assimilated. And this is the way that they got left behind. And for this reason is the reason why many Yahudim began to scatter around Greece and Asia Minor. Now, as we move into the times towards Messiah, there is a period that's not spoken about in great detail. And you see, the lack of people understanding the history surrounding this is a reason why there is so much confusion today about things spoken about in the New Testament. For instance, the many times Paul speaks about the Greeks, because this history is not known, people believe that Paul is speaking about these same Greeks that were inspired by these Greek philosophers. Many people don't understand the history and the rejection that the Yahudim had for the Greeks. And so, being thorough, it's important that I cover this topic next so that there could be no confusion. And as I continue to present my case about Christianity, I will continue to provide more understanding. We have to understand the history that they have kept from us. And it's not like this history is hidden, it's just not taught. And after you understand the history, then you can understand why they keep this history from us. So what we're going to do next is we're going to understand the Maccabean revolt and what took place a century and a half before Yahusha, the Messiah, came. So that's what we're going to cover next as we move through understanding Christianity. In the meantime, please remember, Christianity is a religion that on the surface seems biblical, but when you dig deep into the doctrines, it is not a doctrine of service to our Father, but a doctrine of abusing grace, editing covenants, rejecting the way our Father actually chose to reach humanity, and making it only be about the way Christians want to receive him. It lacks the love, obedience, and reverence for our Father that he deserves. And in the end, it does not prepare those who follow it to be ready for what our Father plans to do in the last days. If you desire to be ready for our Father and his plan for us, you must come out of this religion of tares and come to our Father in truth. Please move to part 14 in this playlist.
All right. So dealing with understanding Hellenization, and man, that was some deep water that we was taking in there. Some of the things he commented on were things that are blatantly obvious, but we just haven't really. I know I certainly hadn't thought about much. The fact that Hellenization is still prevalent right here today.
Okay.
You know, and that was the thing that kind of shook me to my core, because I had not considered such. You know, I see that these things are going on, but I was just calling it the way of society. But society has been Hellenized, and the people have been Hellenized, and that's why they dealing in the manner that they deal in. And he said something right near the end, and I wanted to comment on, but I'm not gonna prolong. I'll just yield there because we got a couple more videos to get through with good information. So go ahead, Doc.
Just real quick, like you said, the world has been Hellenized. You look at uh sports, you know what I mean, like that, how that dominates so
Mhm.
much. It's so much of our focus.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know what I mean, and these are things that we didn't really look at before we came into this walk, but now we're aware. So I'm looking forward to getting into these other videos as well.
Indeed, Aki, indeed. Well, let's jump to it. Let's get to the next one. This is part 14 of the Testing Christianity series. And the name of this one is the Maccabean Revolt, the War Against Hellenization. So the focus again is Hellenization, because that is what we've been dealing with and what's going to have to be resolved. So let's go ahead and get to this one. Here we go.
Okay, so you should be coming from part 13 of the series. These videos are a part of a topical series and should be watched from the beginning in order if you're going to understand what is being presented. So please, if you have not watched from part 1, please stop this video and start back from video 1.
Again, Lisa.
Okay, so in the last video, part 13, we went over the period of the start of Hellenization with Alexander the Great. Many people want to look at that period as the time of Hellenization, and that would not be a wrong assessment. But what that does is it does not allow us to know that we are still in that period of Hellenization. The culture of the Greeks, it's still being spread, except that it just evolves through our modern culture. And though we are under the influence of different empires, from the Romans to Masonic England, the culture of the Greeks has never stopped being spread. Yes, the culture of men changes with time, but it's all based upon the foundation of the ways of the Greeks. But here's the thing. Though the culture of the world evolves and changes, the ways and law of Yahuwah is never changing, which is why Satan desperately wants us to reject it. Now, in that history, as we began to go over Hellenization and how it affected the Yahudim, I had to stop because we were coming to a period where there was resistance to Hellenization, and this was from the Yahudim in Judea. This is a period of time that is very important to the world. You must understand, without these events, the Messiah would not have had people to come back to that would follow him. Yahuwah used this time to preserve this people, and it is a great deal of history that provides an example of how we should be in this world, and it's precisely why they did not put the book of Maccabees in our Bible. Now, I'm going to go over this history, but in case you want to study and research this on your own, I want you to know the sources that I'm using, which is from the book of Maccabees, as well as Solomon Grazel's book, The History of the Jews, and also Flavius Josephus' work from the Antiquities of the Jews. If you want to understand this history that I'm sharing and research it for yourself, these are my sources. Okay, so let's deal with it. This video is actually long overdue. As I explained in part 13, the 3rd century BC was a wave of Hellenization that was taking over the civilized world. everything began to adapt to the ways of the Greeks. Even their old gods were given Greek names. The Yahudim were surrounded by a changing world, all becoming Greeks. Those who took part in this new Greek wave were taking part in a great movement of prosperity as trade began to open new markets. The Yahudim in Judea, they did trade, but they could not keep up with that of their neighbors who truly adjusted. You see, the Yahudim in Judea remained steadfast in their own faith and manner of living. They were not attracted or enticed by the lewd, lawless, and cruel gods of Olympus. Looking at all the culture of the Greeks, from their Greek games, their bathhouses, and their festivals, the Yahudim saw lawlessness and immorality. The Yahudim, who stayed in their land of Judea, never came in contact with the highest Greek civilizations like Athens, not even with the Greek culture from the surrounding areas like from Alexandria. And this point right here is extremely important to understand, but most people, they just don't get it. Even if they had met the real Greek culture and learned about the famous Greek philosophers and the poets, the Yahudim would still have rejected all of it as inferior to their culture of being Yahudim. Why? Because they know that they were the only people in covenant with the Most High Yahuwah. The creator of all was in covenant with them. Those who truly worship Yahuwah had no business following the ways of the other nations. This was commanded by Yah to be holy and set apart. And so more than ever, the Yahudim, they began to stick out and be different people from the rest of the other nations. The rest of the world was becoming Hellenized, and they were sticking to their culture. Now, in regards to economics, based on what was going on in the world around them, the Yahudim in Judea, at that time, they were considered peasants. Remember, they were rebuilding. They only possessed one city worth mentioning, which was Jerusalem. The majority of its population, the farmers, the small merchants, the artisans, they were all content to remain as they were. They were good with their heritage. And like I said, they had no desire to blend in with the outside world. Now, the devil did find his way up in there, though. There were families of the upper classes in Jerusalem, the chief families among the priests who lived in Jerusalem, and the exporters and the importers doing the trade, who were Judea's great merchants. They associated with the upper classes of the other nations that surrounded them, and they began to think in terms of economic prosperity. They wanted to make Jerusalem a great trading center, but this was impossible as long as the other people around the world looked at the people of Jerusalem as strange, foreign, and barbarous savages. The upper class Yahudim, they didn't want to give up their faith. They just wanted to make the Yahudim externally resemble the other nations around them. They argued that dressing in Greek fashion, encouraging the young to play in Greek games, or reorganizing the politics of Jerusalem to a Greek constitution would do no harm to their way of life as Yahudim. And it might lead their neighbors to look upon the Yahudim as people very much like themselves. They wanted to blend in. Basically, they were trying to do the same thing that got them a king in 1 Samuel in the first place. They were trying to be like the other nations. Now, it's said that the main advocate of this Hellenization in Judea were members of a family which may have traced their origin from Tobias the Ammonite, whom Nehemiah in his day had difficulties with. You can read about this in Nehemiah chapter 13. Now, this family, known as the Tobiads, for 2 centuries, though they were not originally Yahudim, but they identified with the Yahudim and they intermingled with the family of the high priest, they played an important role in the politics of the land. So basically, after they came back to the land, some Gentiles intermingled with the Yahudim and they began to have influence with the Yahudim. So about the year 230 BC, one of them, Joseph ben Tobias, brought from the king of Egypt the right to collect the taxes from the entire district of Syria, which consisted of Judea and all of its neighbors. Okay, so Joseph and his family took great advantage of this and used the power that they gained and used it as an opportunity to permanently change the economic position of Jerusalem by diverting trade to it from the other parts of the area. He was trying to bring in new business, basically a new entrepreneur. And it was this power that brought in the problems later to come. So understand something here. This is a very different time period from the times written in the Old Testament and the times written in the New Testament. This history is not spoken of, but it is wildly important to understand the context of the people who Yahusha came to, and then also how the religion of Christianity began. And this brings us to the Maccabean age. So the Maccabean age is something that is known today, but is not overly taught. Just last week, everyone celebrated Hanukkah, but most people don't even know what they're celebrating. This is a period of time around 200 to 150 BC. Extremely important. Now remember, the Greece Empire was split between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. During this time, the Seleucids had an ambition of reuniting all of Alexander's conquest. By the year 198 BC, Antiochus III, called the Great, he took the first step in that direction when he forced Egypt to give up Palestine. Now, when the Seleucids tried to realize their ambitions of reuniting the empire, one group of Yahudim, they favored the annexation of Judea, and then another group wanted to remain part of the Egyptian empire with the Ptolemies. And of course, Hyrcanus, son of Joseph ben Tobias, was on the side of Egypt because he was getting the tax money. The thing, though, is that the common people of Judea, they did not care because it made no difference to them whether it was the Ptolemies or the Seleucids taking their tax. But as soon as their way that they worship Yah got involved, this is when things started to change and the common people began to take sides. So this is where things heat up. So the side of the Yahudim who sided with the Seleucids, the side of the Seleucids would also be known as Syrians. These Yahudim revealed to Seleucus IV that much money belonging to his opponents in Egypt was stored in the temple. Seleucus, being anxious to lay his hands on more money, sent out one of his officials, Heliodorus, to confiscate the money in the temple. Now it's said that when Heliodorus went into the temple, he was confronted by a man on horseback who had beaten him to within an inch of his life. Heliodorus was scarcely able to leave, and he left without taking any money. And so this pro-Seleucid group of the Yahudim, this was their first attempt to gain control of Judea, and it was defeated. But from this, there was a major rift because the Yahudim saw how these Hellenized Yahudim would stop at nothing to achieve their goal of gaining control. I mean, they sent Gentiles into the temple to rob it. It was crazy. Now, Seleucus IV, he died and was succeeded by his brother Antiochus IV. And this is the real problem one, and the one written about in the book of Maccabees. Antiochus also desired to conquer Egypt and reunite his empire. And he hoped to achieve this by means of attaching the various provinces to himself as the embodiment of Greek culture. He gave himself the surname Epiphanes, which means the visible God. In other words, he was declaring that him and their god Jupiter were to be considered identical. Judea was important to Antiochus to have a loyal Hellenized population. But it didn't matter because Judea was the one that made the least progress in Hellenization. They resisted it. And so when a group of those sellout Hellenized Yahudim came to him with a proposed plan to speed up Hellenization in Judea, Antiochus, he was eager to take part in it. The plan was to remove the high priest that was already there and put in their Hellenized brother in place. And then in return for a sum of money, Antiochus promised to grant Jerusalem a Greek constitution and the right to coin money, which would help the city grow commercially. This was all about business. Okay, so the plans were carried out, and they replaced the high priest with their sellout version. And the common people of the Yahudim were outraged. It was the first time since the Yahudim returned from Babylonian exile that a non-Yahudim government had interfered in the succession to the high priesthood. This is a major office, treating the office as if it were nothing more than ordinary governorship. And worse than that, now that the Hellenized Yahudim had full control of Judea's government, they began to build gymnasiums within Jerusalem in which young people were encouraged to spend a great deal of time there. The young priests began to neglect their duties in the temple in order to play sports. This new culture that was being introduced to them was distracting them. The Greek styles in dress, the Greek names, the Greek language became stylish in Jerusalem. And worst of all, the Hellenized life brought looseness in the application of the Torah, as well as the well-known looseness of morals of the Greeks. Now listen, though things were changing to the sellout Yahudim, they were not changing fast enough. They were trying to get their business going. The Hellenized Yahudim, aligned to Syria, they were not happy with the pace of Hellenization, and they complained to Antiochus that Jason, the high priest, the one that they put in, he was not moving with enough purpose. they promised Antiochus an enormous sum to appoint a radical Hellenist to the high priesthood. So this high priest Jason was forced to flee, and this time they appointed Menelaus. Menelaus was not even a member of the high priestly family. He was a man without sympathy or care for any of the Yahudim ways. He just desired power. Now, to Antiochus, the way he saw it, the unwillingness and rejection of the Yahudim to be Hellenized and come to the Greek culture, it was something that he couldn't comprehend. Basically, the nerve of these people to resist. And because he did not respect Yahuwah and the Yahudim, he basically resolved that if it was the way of the Yahudim that stood in his way of reuniting his Greek empire, the way of the Yahudim must be destroyed. And he gave the order to destroy the culture and practice of the Yahudim and force them to be Greeks. He was outlawing the Torah. So he sent an army. A part of the Syrian army marched into Jerusalem to support Menelaus and his policies. Many of the inhabitants were killed and others escaped to the hills. This happened on the 25th of Kislev. Only the known Hellenists remained. Orders were given, making it illegal to observe the Sabbath, the feast days, and circumcision. They forced them to eat unclean meats like pork. In the temple above the altar was placed a statue of Jupiter bearing an obvious resemblance to Antiochus. They even brought pigs to be sacrificed on the altar before the statue, straight up defiling the temple. The common people of Judea watched these things in horror. They looked at it all as a result of the influence of Hellenism and the abandonment of the principles of the Torah from the upper classes. Basically, these upper class, they abandoned the Torah, and this is what happened after that. And so a group began to emerge that resolved that there were only two courses that remained. Either they die fighting or they die as martyrs. This group was known as Hasidim. They were the lower class among the Yahudim, and they were not organized as any army. They resolved that they could let themselves be slaughtered for their ideals, but they could not lead in fighting for them. Now, an interesting point to note is that among the Rev 29s are a group known as the Hasidics. Where I grew up in New York, there were a bunch of them. They belonged to a special movement within Orthodox Judaism, a movement that, at its height in the first half of the 19th century, they claimed the allegiance of millions in Eastern and Central Europe, perhaps a majority of the Eastern European Jews. They, to this day, wear traditional clothing styles from the 18th century in Eastern Europe. For example, Hasidic men often wear black coats and big furry hats, and Hasidic women dress very modestly and cover their hair in public with a wig or a headscarf. This group have taken on this name from the Hasidim, but they would like people to believe that they are this actual group that's been since the time of Maccabees. But no, this is a movement that originated in Eastern Europe in the 18th century. And the craziest point is that the founder of this movement, Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, a Jewish mystic, basically practitioner of Kabbalah, he is also known as Baal Shem Tov, which is said to mean master of the good name. That is, one able to work miracles using the secret name of God. The secret name of God. Listen, if you dig into who these people are, it truly exposes itself. It's right in plain sight. So when you see them, know that they just are ones who took over the name of this group of Yahudim who stood for the Torah. It's just another part of hijacking our culture. And they want the world to believe that they are truly following Yah, but this group, they're founded by those who practice Kabbalah. I thought that that would be an interesting point to share, but enough of that. Let's get back to the history. And so when the way of the Yahudim was declared illegal and the soldiers of Antiochus spread their net over Judea, those who persisted in being Yahudim and living according to the Torah, the result for them was martyrdom. Men, women, and even children gave their lives rather than violate the Torah. I'm going to read about it from the Sefer in the book of Maccabees. And having subdued them, he established a decree that if any of them lived according to the Torah of his country, he should die. And when he could by no means destroy by his decrees the obedience to the Torah of the nation, but saw all his threats and punishments without effect, for even women, because they continued to circumcise their children, were flung down a precipice along with them, knowing beforehand of the punishment. When therefore his decrees were disregarded by the people, he himself compelled by means of tortures everyone of this race by tasting forbidden meats to abjure the Yahudic faith. That's 4 Maccabees chapter 4, verses 23 through 26. Then, in the next chapter, the Greek Antiochus tortures a well-known old man of Yehuda, Eleazar, the priest. But in chapter 8, this is what really got me. Then, indeed, vehemently, swayed with passion, he commanded to bring others of the adult Hebrew, and if they would eat of the unclean thing, to let them go when they had eaten. But if they objected, to torment them more grievously. The tyrant, having given this charge, 7 brethren were brought into his presence, along with their aged mother, handsome and modest and well-born, and altogether comely, whom, when the tyrant beheld, encircling their mother as in a dance, he was pleased at them, and being struck with their becoming and ingenuous mien, smiled upon them, and calling them near, said, O youths, with favorable feelings, I admire the beauty of each of you, and greatly honor so numerous a band of brethren. I not only counsel you not to share the madness of the old man who has been tortured before, but I do beg you to yield and to enjoy my friendship. For I possess the power not only of punishing those who disobey my commands, but of doing good to those who obey them. Put confidence in me, then, and you shall receive places of authority in my government. If you forsake your national ordinance, and, conforming to the Greek mode of life, alter your rule, and revel in youth's delights. For if you provoke me by your disobedience, you will compel me to destroy you, everyone, with terrible punishments by tortures. Have mercy, then, upon your own selves, whom I, although an enemy, compassionate for your age and comeliness. Will you not reason upon this, that if you disobey, there will be nothing left for you but to die in tortures? Thus speaking, he ordered the instrument of torture to be brought forward, that very fear might prevail upon them to eat unclean meat. And when the spearmen brought forward the wheels, and the racks, and the hooks, and catapults, and cauldrons, pans, and finger racks, and iron hands, and wedges, and bellows, the tyrant continued. That's 4 Maccabees chapter 8, verses 1 through 12. And what happened was that each one of them resisted, from the oldest child to the youngest child, all the way to the mother. They all resisted not to eat pork and to go against their Torah. This is what they were about. They all went down the line and dealt with the tortures so that they could stand for Yah. And this is what was happening to the Yahudim. And so as this was happening, thousands, they abandoned their homes. As the news of the Greek soldiers was coming to enforce the edict of the king, they knew they needed to get out of there. They fled to the hills where they hid till the soldiers departed. And worse, the Hellenized Yahudim began to snitch and inform the Greeks who the Hasidim were that were betraying the people further. The Yahudim of Judea hated these Hellenized Yahudim. Now the Hasidim did not put up a fight and they died as martyrs, but many other Yahudim put up a fight. They did not permit themselves to be slaughtered without resisting. But the Hellenized Yahudim knew how to get around them, because as long as they were under the influence of the Hasidim, they would not defend themselves on the Sabbath. So the result was that these wicked Greeks learned to wait until the Sabbath in order to attack these Yahudim and destroy them. The end of the Yahudim was in sight. Now, among the Yahudim were some peaceful farmers northwest of Jerusalem and a little town of Modin. Among the most respected were the descendants of a priestly family called the Hasmoneans. The head of the family at this time of Antiochus was an aged Mattathias who had 5 sons: Simon, Eliezer, Yehuda, Yohanan, and Johannathan. Mattathias and his sons, they were increasingly dreadful, thinking about the time when the Greeks were going to come and deliver their royal edict. And the moment soon came. In the marketplace of the little town of Modin, the Syrian soldiers put up an altar. The men of Modin were assembled there. A pig was produced, which the soldiers had brought with them. And Mattathias, as a priest and elder, was ordered to sacrifice it to Jupiter in honor of Antiochus. Mattathias, he did not move. From out of the crowd, a young Yahudim stepped forward, who, judging by his dress, he was a Hellenizer. He asked to perform the sacrifice. There was no doubt what would happen next. The other Yahudim would be asked to eat some of the sacrificial meat, and those who refused would be executed. So the Selach Yahudim, he approached the animal. The soldiers were standing side by side on one side of the altar. The Yahudim stood there watching the performance, and then suddenly everything changed and the entire scene was transformed. the aged Mattathias, standing closest to the captain of the troops and to that sellout Yahudim, he snatched the sword out of the captain's hands and ran it through the body of the traitor. As the captain quickly moved forward to stop him, Mattathias stabbed him too. Obviously, by impulse, his sons rushed the other soldiers before they could even realize what happened. The other Yahudim ran to aid them, and the soldiers were killed and their altar completely destroyed. Mattathias says, "Whoever is for Yahuwah, let him come unto me." The call echoed over the land, across the hills of Judea, and in the caves, wherever the Hasidim were hiding. Mattathias and the rest of the people of Modin were themselves compelled to abandon their homes in the face of larger forces of Syrians that would come to avenge the death of the first group. They needed to go. But they didn't go just to hide. They regrouped and formed a strategy. The band of Mattathias began to attack small troops of soldiers or communities in which the Hellenist Yahudim were strong. And the Yahudim rallied behind Mattathias in hopes to preserve themselves. Eventually, living in the hills, it became too much for old Mattathias. Before a year was up, around 167 BC, he died. The leadership went to his son, Yahuda, who distinguished himself above all the others. And for some reason, he acquired the surname Maccabee. Some say it derived from Maccabet, the Hebrew word for hammer. Either way, under Yahuda's leadership, the Yahudim began to win against the Syrians. This Maccabean army, they were a small army in number, but mighty in power and quality. In time, as the size of the forces increased, Yahuda Maccabee, he felt emboldened to measure his strength with the other larger groups of the enemy, and so he went right at them. The local Syrian commanders, they gathered their forces, including the Hellenized Yahudim, and each time they thought that they had Yahuda and his camp cornered, the Maccabeans prevailed. Now, Antiochus, he realized he had a full-size rebellion on his hands in this province. It was obviously necessary for him to suppress it. Fortunately for the Yahudim, at that same time, the Parthians in the northeast, they also rebelled against Antiochus and sought independence from the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus hurried off to fight them. He appointed a general by the name of Lysias. He gave him full power to stamp out the Judean revolt. Now, like those before him, Lysias underestimated the strength of the Maccabean forces. Instead of sending a full army to crush the rebellion in Judea, he dispatched two subordinates, smaller groups. Yahuda, he was familiar with the country and the mountain and was able to surprise and annihilate the Syrians in the dead of night. This was called the Battle of Emaus, and the great result of this victory was that the road was now open to Jerusalem. In high spirits with songs of praise, hallelujah on their lips, the Maccabean army approached the sacred city, which had been in the hands of the enemy for almost 3 years. The high priest Menelaus, the Hellenizing Yahudim, and the new pagan residents, they fled from Jerusalem just 3 years from when they first started their campaign. The simple peasants, whom the love of Yah and their freedom had turned them into soldiers, now dropped the sword in order to do what they had really been fighting for, cleansing the temple and reestablishing their worship. They removed every sign of paganism. They took part of the altar, which had been defiled by pagan sacrifices, and put aside its stones. They erected a new altar in its place. Exactly 3 years after the desolating abomination had been introduced into the temple, they destroyed the statue of Zeus Antiochus into dust and rededicated the temple to the worship of Yahuwah. Beginning on the 25th of Kislev in 165 BC, they celebrated the dedication feast for 8 days, which is why it's called the Feast of Dedication, what we all know as Hanukkah. And from this victory, the Yahudim were able to preserve their way of life, their worship of Yahuwah, and continue to live how they were called to by Yah. We even see Yahusha celebrate this in John chapter 10. It says, "And it was at Jerusalem the feast of Hanukkah, and it was winter. And Yahusha walked in the temple in Solomon's porch." That's John chapter 10, verse 22 and 23. You see, many people don't understand the celebration of Hanukkah. And for me, as I'm relearning our heritage, I am relearning this time as well, because I don't want to do it in any way that the current Rev 29s do it. So I'm relearning this myself. But I do understand the reason for the celebration. And now, if you understand this history that we just went through, I hope you understand it now as well. You see, 3 years earlier, the Yahudim were killed and the temple was desecrated and made unholy by Antiochus and the Greeks. 3 years to the day after it happened, the Yahudim who revolted won back their freedom to worship Yahuwah, And through the power of Yahuwah, they rededicated the temple and recommitted themselves to Yahuwah. And if this did not happen, we would not have been able to have our Messiah come and fulfill prophecy. It all leads to Messiah because without this event, the Yahudim, they would have been fully assimilated into the Greeks, very much how it is today. Antiochus wanted to wipe them off. He wanted to get rid of all worship of Yah and remove them all. Because of their commitment to Yah, they did not allow this to happen. And this is exactly why they kept this out of the book. They recommitted themselves to Yahuwah and rededicated the temple that was desecrated back to Yahuwah. And this is what is celebrated. This is not the worship of gods, but a celebration of rededicating themselves back to Yahuwah. Again, without this event, Yahusha, he would not have had a place to come back to, and his ministry would not be possible. Yahuwah used the smallest people that truly loved him, and he gave them power to defeat a great foe. When you read about this in the Sefer, you can see why they removed these books from our Bibles, because this history can provide us a great deal of influence for us. I know whenever I read it, I get revved up. We know that if we serve Yah, nothing can come against us, and we win. We know that our people took great sacrifices to live according to the Torah that the majority of people today want to say it doesn't matter. We know that the history of the Hellenized Yahudim is something that's not truly understood because we only know about it from a Hellenized point of view. We only look at the Hellenized Yahudim scattered around Asia Minor, but we don't look at it from the people that were actually in Judea that were there when Messiah walked the earth. They hated these Hellenized Yahudim. These Hellenized Yahudim, they were not respected and they were hated. And they called them Greeks and Gentiles because they did not associate them with the Yahudim any longer. You see, when you remove this history, it allows other people to create other doctrines and not truly understand the times that followed when the good news of Messiah began to be spread. The Hellenized culture was a problem for the Yahudim. And if allowed, it would have replaced them and removed the Yahudim and the potential for Bible prophecy to be fulfilled. But these events are why we are here talking about Yahusha and we are blessed by him. Without understanding this history, it's why people can embrace Hellenization and act as if the blending and assimilating with the Greeks was something that was accepted. Do you realize what they went through over this Hellenization? People were killed. I mean, it was just really bad. Imagine China taking over the United States, and hundreds of years later, you're learning about American history from the point of view of the Chinese. This is how people treat the Bible. Yes, of course, among the Yahudim, there were sellouts, and they tried to enforce the selling out and spread the selling out. But the true people, guarded by Yahuwah, did not allow this culture of Hellenization to go forth. And so for us, we should have no tolerance for Hellenization because Hellenization was only put forth in order to push away the Torah and the influence of Yah's people. And it still is being used in the same way today. It's just that the Hellenists are in the abundance and they are uneducated and indoctrinated, and they don't even know that they're Hellenists. Christians are the Hellenists of our modern day, and their movement seeks to do the same thing as the Greeks of the time of Maccabees. It's why they're called Christians and not Messianists. They identify with Christos of the Greeks and not the Messiah of the Hebrews. They adopt to the ways of the Greeks. Now, there's a lot more to say about this, but I wanted to make sure I covered this because as we discuss Christianity, if you have no context of what happened before Messiah came, there are certain things you will not understand later. And this is why there's so much confusion today, because this history is just not taught. So now that this is understood, there should be a clear understanding of the separation there is between the Greeks and the Yahudim. And it should be understood why there is a rejection of merging Greek culture in with the faith of Yasharel. If you don't get it by now, you don't want to. The Yahudim fought a major war to reject the spread of Hellenization. They hated the Greeks, and that's why they rejected the Hellenized Yahudim all around Asia Minor. And if you need proof of that, let me show you. Remember when Yahusha said he will go to a place that they cannot follow? Let's go to John chapter 7. It says, "Then Yahusha said to them, I shall be with you a little while longer, and then I go to him who sent me. You will seek me and not find me, and where I am, you cannot come." Then the Yahudim said among themselves, "Where does he intend to go that we shall not find him? Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks? What is this thing that he said, 'You will seek me and not find me, and where I am, you cannot come'?" That's John chapter 7, verses 33 through 36. You see, they assumed he was talking about going amongst the dispersion of the Greeks. Think about it. They thought he was going to a place that they couldn't come, and they instantly thought it was about the sellouts. Why? Because they did not get down with them, and there was a complete rejection of them. And this is why you keep hearing about Paul. There's no difference between Yahudim and Greek, but everyone today thinks he's talking about the pagan Greeks. It's absolutely ridiculous. That's not who he's talking about. You see, because we don't know this history, we now want to accept Hellenization, and we rationalize and say, because the only manuscripts of the New Testament are written in Greek now, not that they were actually all written in Greek, but that's the only manuscripts that we have that's in Greek. Because of this, we believe that they should erase the history of the people and conform to a different culture. Again, it's like the story of, let's say, Donald Trump, but China takes over America. It becomes the dominant culture in this world. Now they change Donald Trump to a Chinese man. They make him look Chinese, and they adapt his ways to Chinese culture. And they say, hey, it's okay, because China is the main influence now. That's absolutely ridiculous. But this is exactly what people do today. They changed a Hebrew Messiah to Greek, and they gave him a Greek name. They made him look a whole different way. And they say that you're wrong and a part of a cult if you go back to the Hebrew roots, which makes no sense. This is the kind of thing that people allow with the Messiah, who they claim is their God. They changed the culture of the people and adapted it to the Greeks, even though the Greeks were the absolute enemy of the Yahudim, and they hated everything about them and their ways. The overall majority in Christianity adapt their faith to the way of the Greeks rather than the way of the Hebrews. Matter of fact, there is a major rejection of the Hebrew roots, even though everything about the scriptures is rooted from the Hebrews. Everyone who speaks against the Hebrew roots speaks against the actual faith that they say they have. This is able to happen because people don't know this history and they don't understand the truly set-apart culture that our Father led his people through, which is why people argue to be called Christians according to the way of the Greeks, and they reject anything about the Hebrews. Though this faith, again, it's actually rooted from the Hebrews. I'm going to keep repeating it. Now you know. The Greeks were against the faith of the Hebrews, and they tried to make their influence no more. If it were up to the Greeks, you would not have the Messiah. Now that we understand this, I'm going to go to the times of the church fathers and break down how they blended the Hebrew scriptures with their Greek philosophers, and that will lead us to the Trinity. So we will deal with that next. In the meantime, please remember, Christianity is a religion that on the surface seems biblical. But when you dig deep into the doctrines, it is not a doctrine of service to our Father, but a doctrine of abusing grace, editing covenants, rejecting the way our Father actually chose to reach humanity, and making it only be about the way Christians want to receive him. It lacks the love, obedience, and reverence for our Father that he deserves. And in the end, it does not prepare those who follow it to be ready for what our Father plans to do in the last days. If you desire to be ready for our Father and his plan for us, you must come out of this religion of tares and come to our Father in truth. Please move to part 15 in this playlist, and we will discuss the...
All right. So, one thing that brother said that resonated with me and that deeply was he rejects Hellenization. And I want to go on record and say that I too reject Hellenization. And I was talking to my when we before we came on, and I was telling him, you know, you have to think about you have to think about what it must have been like for the Yahudim or for the Yehowadim to be in their land doing their thing, and all of a sudden here these Greeks show up, and now they want you to be like them. You know, that would have been like, man, yeah, absolutely no. No, that's no, we're not doing that. We got our own thing. What we going to be like you for? You should want to be like us. I mean, we got the best thing going on, and you just a idiot with ideology that means nothing. And even today, though, those same people who are holding on so tightly to this Hellenized way of thinking, this Hellenized operation, they reject the true word coming out of the scripts. They reject it. I don't want to do that. I don't want nothing to do with that because I have my own way. And the Messiah well, I say their own way, but it's really the way that they have learned. The Messiah taught us against the traditions of men and how detrimental that is for us to deal with the traditions of men as if they are the commandments of the Most High. When he got on the, uh, the priest for dealing with the traditions of men and rejecting the ways of the Most High, being that doing evil. So I'm gonna yield there, and I don't know. I feel like we could do this last video, but I kind of feel like we probably need to not do it. We could probably wait till tomorrow and get that one in.
Okay. Well, you know, I've got a script.
Oh, go ahead.
And this is in reference to those brothers that we saw that wouldn't eat the swine, the elder that wouldn't eat the swine, in the book of Joshua, chapter 1, in a couple of different spots. But I'll pull it from verse 9, and it says, "Have not I commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be you dismayed. For Yahweh, your power is with you, whithersoever you go." So this is what I feel like those brothers embodied. They were doing what had been commanded to our ancestors. They failed, but their blood was not. It wasn't for nothing. Now, you know, their rebellion and rebelling against the heathen customs, it ignited our people, well, the righteous members of our people, to come together. And despite the odds, they, you know, because we know the story, we know that they were outnumbered. Our people were outnumbered by the Greeks, but despite those numbers, they went out and fought anyway and prevailed. And that was because they were being of good courage and strong, like they had been commanded. All praises to the Most High.
Hallelujah. Yes, indeed. It definitely. Abba is great, you know, and it's amazing when he puts us in a position to beat insurmountable odds, and it's just absolutely magnificent to see it and to read it, to witness it, and it's such a barakah. But yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll pick up that other video tomorrow. It's already 11 o'clock and it's 40 minutes long. I don't want to take us into midnight, so time we watch it and then talk about it. Yeah, it'll be midnight.
It'll be after midnight, probably.
Yeah, I'm telling you. But yeah, we'll pick up that one tomorrow, and we'll probably have another video to review as well. And that'll, most high willing, that'll give us the opportunity to expound on it with a little bit more time. And yeah, so we'll do that. But this was very interesting, very well done and drawn out. So kudos or shout out to this brother for doing this work here, and you know, that great presentation. I always enjoy his animations and him, you know, just giving us the information, things that are right there in front of you, but you just never really said, never really thought on. You know, it was right there, and just never realized that, man, we still in the Hellenization period. You know, we still being Hellenized. Our people are still Hellenized. That's a big deal. That's not a small thing. That's a very big deal. So praises to the Abba. We're going to go ahead and close on out. And like I said, most high willing, we will pick up tomorrow, if it be his will. We do this for our brethren, our family of the Mishpachah. And Romans chapter 10 and verse 1, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Ha'abba for Israel is that they may be saved. That is the desire. We want to see our people resolved from this captivity, from all of our problems, from all those who seek to destroy us, from those who seek to Hellenize us. And one thing he did say, he mentioned, I think in the first video, he mentioned the mystery religion, and I did want to comment on that. I didn't. I don't agree with that totally. I see why he said it, and it's not necessarily a bad statement. I don't think it's correct in the sense because you know, one particular thing that I wanted that I was going to mention and I kind of forgot in that first video, but now that it's come to me, we read in his own Revelation about Satan's seat, and it's not in Rome, it's not in Greece, it's not in Europe, it's in well, it's in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Europe?
Eurasia, in antiquity, I know I'll say this in back when we were learning in school about world civilizations, they would tell us that in Turkey is where the East and the West met.
Okay. Yeah, let me pull it up real quick and just kind of see if we can. I meant to mention that, and then it slipped me, and I didn't want to, you know what I'm saying? But I need to. I want to comment on that.
And I guess why I kind of consider it part of Europe, because when we took a look at Bereshit 10 and we saw where these sons of Japhet went, so many different sons of Japhet went to Turkey. You remember that?
Yeah. It was about 3 out of his. I forget how many he had exactly, but if you look right here, here's Turkey. Here's Israel, right? Right here. Turkey is just to the straight north.
Right.
Straight north of Israel. Here's Mizraim. You know, it's straight north. But look what else is straight north. You got, you know, Spain, France, Italy, Greece. Greece is what, north, almost west, going west, and then Rome is, or Italy is, yeah, definitely northwest. So, but yeah, Turkey is right here. So this is where Satan's seat is mentioned as being located. So it's almost. I see what you're saying. It definitely right there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost Middle East, but it's almost Europe as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
What they call Middle East. Go ahead.
Exactly. But I don't know. All those names are like socially constructed anyway, like Europe. You know, because we now know that Africa is not the name of Africa. It was a Kebulon. So but we know that the sons of Japhet took on the Isles of the coast or something like that. I'm paraphrasing exactly, but
yeah. Well, look at here. Here's Istanbul. I mean, it looks like it connects. It does connect.
And Istanbul, that's what it's called now, and they changed the name of it when the Muslims took over. But in antiquity, it was called Constantinople.
Oh wow!
Yeah, that was where that was part of the Roman Empire right there. That was the Eastern Roman Empire.
Wow, the Eastern leg of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's interesting. This is all interesting, but yeah, it is physically connected to Europe here and to Turkey, and Turkey is physically connected to Syria. Here's Syria right here.
Mm-hmm.
And across Syria, you in Turkey. So you could literally walk. I mean, from here's Israel, Syria, go straight up Syria, boom, you in Turkey. You know, I'm pretty sure when they came straight, this way, either through this direction. Looks like there's another portion of it right here that looks connect. Well, it looks like it may not be connected, but it's close. Oh no, it's not. It's not. It's not. Yeah, that's separated. It just looks like that when it's close together like that. But where it shows Istanbul, oh look, it seems separated. I wonder has that happened over time? I didn't.
So, and is that man? I wonder was that man made also? But I
Yeah,
don't know. That'd
that
be a
could that
yeah.
could be the case because look at that. It's like a uh, almost a river or a channel or something that separated
Mm-hmm.
that.
Like a canal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't notice that when it was poured out like this, and you get this far back, you really can't tell. But looks like both of those are separated. But I wonder how reasonable it is to cross that because I'm thinking about at that time how they would have gotten over to come there because they wouldn't have had no helicopter. You know what I'm saying, or airplane. They would have had to, maybe it was a bridge or something. I don't know. But um, for them to come down, for the Greeks, the Romans, for them to come down and deal with the, children of Israel and conquer all of this, they had to get through. Either that was where they could cross it, or they had to figure a way to get through it. One of the two. So, but yeah, I wanted to bring that out about where Satan's seat was, which is mentioned in again Hazon. Matter of fact, let's go to that real quick before we close out, because we got I mean, it's still relatively early, but we're not going to be
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to be long. Not going to be long. I want to say it's chapter 3. Am I thinking about it right now?
I want to say you're right.
Yeah, I want to say it's
It's
chapter.
either 2 or 3.
Yeah, I want to say it's 3. I might be. Let me see. Let me see. Sardis. It's
I think it's 2. A message to Paragonum.
oh, okay. Okay.
Is that the right place?
I
Oh yeah,
think
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
yeah. Okay. Well, Satan see this. Uh is it verse
I picked it up at 12.
12? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. It says to the Malik of the assembly in Paragon Pergamos, right? These
Con.
things uh said he with the sharp sword with 2 edges. I know your works and where you dwell, even where Satan's seat is, and you hold fast to my name and have not denied my faith. Even in those days were uh, Antiochus or
Antipas.
Antipas, my bad, it's like Antipas, I don't speak Greek. Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth. So where is this? He's talking about Satan dwelling. He's talking about here in uh, Pergamos.
Mm-hmm.
When you go into this Pergamos, and I'll show you how we came to that. So let
Con.
me,
I remember us looking at it. I remember us, and I was like, wow.
yeah. Well, this is for the people who hadn't seen it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when we take that word and we put it into the search, Pergamos may refer to an ancient Greek city, a Turkish uh, Sarat village, or a city in the Bible. So uh, yeah, so when you search it here, it gives us in the blue letter, it gives us a place in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally what it
So
tells.
yeah, and then when I looked it up in the blue letter, it says Pergamos height or elevation, a
Mhm.
city in Asia Minor. So where's Asia Minor? That
Mhm.
would be Turkey. That's
Mhm.
what they call Turkey, Asia Minor.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So that's some more heavy smoke for you. So some heavy water to dive into. So but yeah, we're gonna go ahead and wrap this on up here. Now that we've gotten that information out of the way, and we understand where Satan's seat is, we also understand where um, these Greeks were coming from, and why they had such an ordeal with the Yahudim trying to change our culture, our way of life, and get rid of those things. Now it really makes. I mean, it made sense before, but it really makes sense when you read the book of Maccabees. One of the hardest to read, the first chapter. I mean, it's absolutely sickening to read that. But uh, we went over Romans, lastly, Ecclesiastes chapter number 12 and verse number 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is so very important for us to understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. At the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled and all the smoke is cleared, we will be judged on whether we have feared the Most High and truly kept his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. I am Yaakazaki Yahu, joined by my most esteemed Akenaniah, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah Bashem, Yahushua HaMashiach, Wamalak, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, wa baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day when the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, and our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Until that day come, shalom, family.
Shalom, shalom, Mr. Paka.
Hallelujah. Praises to the Abba. Praise you, Abba Yah. Barak Hashem. Yahuwah. Hallelujah.